Hello, everyone. My name is Magda. I'm a digital marketing manager in Otwarte Klatki, which is a Polish branch of Anima International. And at this meeting, I will tell you about how psychological knowledge could be useful in our communication as animal advocacy groups. The topic of psychology is very popular in the media, pop culture, and it seems to me that many people have much more knowledge about psychology than about other fields of science. But it often turns out that in practice, we do not use this knowledge. And I'm also talking about myself. I studied psychology, and sometimes on a daily basis, I forget things that a first year student knows. And that's why I try from time to time to go back to theoretical knowledge and think about how it applies to our work. Today I'm going to talk about 5 examples where I think this knowledge helps me in my work for animals in the marketing field, and I hope it helps you too. The first example of a psychological term which I think is useful to understand in communication is a theory of mind. Theory of mind is a concept describing understanding other beings by realizing that they have minds through which can have different knowledge of the world around them. Usually develops in humans about 4 years old. And this picture shows Sally and test, which is a classic test used in developmental psychology to measure this concept. And children under 4-5 years old think that Sally would look for a ball in the box because they can't understand that she doesn't know that Annie changed the ball's location. They can't understand that other people have different states of mind than they do, that they have different knowledge, see the world differently, and have different feelings. And for adults, it may seem easy, but I think in practice, we very often forget about it. Remembering about it is very important in communication. And for me, it's connected with one of the very important basic concepts using in marketing, and it's marketing funnel. It's a concept describing a customer's journey into contact with an organization, from someone who doesn't know the brand to a loyal customer. And in our case, as an animal advocacy organization, it's a journey from someone who doesn't know about us or the topic of factory farming to an engaged donor or activist. And in most cases, it won't happen with one contact with an organization. And that's marketing cliche to remember about the target group, but it's really important to have it in the back of your head when preparing a content. To which group it is, what they already know, what will be interesting for them, but also what will be understandable for them. And when communicating, you have to think about the mind of your recipient. How with his state of knowledge, emotions, he will perceive given information. Because we as deeply involved activists are interested in quite different things than people who are only at the beginning of this path. And it affects what topics we discuss, what words we use, how deeply we go into details. And this is important not only in social media or ads, but also, for example, when contacting companies or politicians, because different messages and arguments will be interesting and convincing to companies who don't really understand what's wrong with the cage eggs, because they are like at the top of the funnel, and different to those who already know about the topic and, for example, are still hesitating, and they are at the bottom of the funnel. But going back to marketing, here are some social media examples of content for different levels of funnel. The first one, it's a post with rescued fox and text, don't shoot on New Year's Eve. And you don't have to be interested in animal rights to interact with this content. It's made just for animal lovers, and everyone who just like cats and dogs could share this. And it's a great post for people at the top of the marketing funnel to catch the first contact with an organization. The second example is for people somehow interested in the topic of factory farming. It's a disturbing photo with a copy of a question or caged eggs worth it. The message is simple, but at the same time, it is directed to people who are already initially interested in helping animals. And the last example is a content for people who are really engaged in helping animals and are interested how to do it effectively. This is YouTube episode about basics of effective altruism. And for most observers, this will be not very interesting, but there is a group at the bottom of this funnel who are important and who will find this topic interesting. And when communicating, we should remember about the people on each level of the funnel and create content that fits these different levels. And thinking about what people in a particular group know, what they find interesting, what they understand, what they don't understand, is important and helpful. And so try to think about the mind of your audience and remember that it's different from yours. Okay, the next thing from first year psychology textbooks, which for me is very, very helpful in work, is a basic understanding of methodology and scientific method, which is just a way of gaining knowledge about the world that is currently the standard in the world of science. And simplifying, it is based on creating hypotheses, then making some measurements, then changing something by our manipulation, then making measurements again and checking what happened. On this basis, we verify the hypothesis. It's also important what kind of manipulation we do. And to better understand it, we use the term variable, which is just a characteristic, property, or a factor that takes on some value. And there are two types of variables. It's helpful to understand the difference, independent and dependent. When we manipulate the independent variable, and that affects the dependent variable. It will be easier to understand on the example. For example, we want to know if with a donation ads on Facebook, we should target the general population or a very narrow group of people interested in animal rights. So we have an independent variable, which is targeting, and we check how it influences the dependent variable, which is cost per donation. The holy grail of science is an experiment. It's a procedure which gives us the highest degree of confidence. An experiment where we manipulate the independent variable, then measure dependent variable. We try to control the side variables, which are variables which may have influence but are not the subject of the study. And we have to have a large enough sample. And the last concept, it's a quantitative and qualitative data. For example, judging the effectiveness of the post, we can take into account the quantitative aspect of the data. For example, how many comments it has, as well as the qualitative. For example, what type of comment it is. A good example is analytical tools. Google Analytics can show us how many people visit our website. But for example, screen records from Hotjar with user sessions can show us individual users, and this allows us to catch things that the numbers won't tell us. Okay, so it was this more boring part, but what about it is useful in marketing? Here are some tips. If you want to have some conclusions from your ads, newsletters, try to control variables. Don't mix variables and make a few changes in once. For example, different text, graphics, target groups. The best way to test your ideas about what can be effective is A/B testing. There are a few ways to do this, for example, by ads, by newsletters, by tests on websites. It's just important that if you want to check if a certain type of communication is more effective, try to test this one thing. The next one, it's important not to make strong conclusions on the basis of a small pieces of data. For example, if you are running a test with different graphics, with a call to action to sign the petition, don't think that after 20 signatures, you would know something. Select the sample size for what you want to test. Okay, the next thing, don't forget about the quantitative aspect of data, because it's really easy to get anchored on numbers like reach, petition signatures, but they don't show you everything. Also remember that correlation is not causation. And just because one popular post was uploaded at 3 p.m. doesn't mean that uploading posts at this time is the best thing to do. But such correlations may be a good starting point for forming hypotheses. Okay, remember that the data you see is only a piece of reality and has a high risk of error, and there is little we can say we know with a great confidence. Anyway, in marketing, we have it easier than in other fields of activity, because how to know for sure whether launching a campaign against a certain company or hiring a certain person was a good decision. Here we have even less good data. So in marketing, we are in a very good starting point. But in general, that's also why I don't have ready advices how to make a great post, because I don't know. I have some knowledge about our activity as Otwarty Klatki, and often it could be helpful in other contexts, but it's not sure. And in marketing, there are no general rules like post at this time about this with graphic like this, and it will be a success. Okay, the next chapter from the psychology textbook, which may be helpful, is about cognitive psychology. This field explores concepts like attention, memory, perception, or thinking. And in marketing, we would love to know which things catch our attention, because attention is a resource. And in digital, we have a very short moment to catch it. So what catches our attention? Distinctive colors. It's very simple, but totally worth to use it when designing your landing page, post, or ad. Here's our donation page, and you can see that there is one eye-catchy element, and it's a donate button. It's eye-catchy because of the red color, which is contrasting, but also stands out because the rest is rather subtle. Okay, the next eye-catcher for our brains are faces, both humans and other animals. It's worth to use them on graphics and, for example, first scenes of your movies. The next distinctive thing for our brain is of movement. So it's worth to try the simple animated graphics or GIFs instead of a static picture. Next one are bubbles and irregularity. Diagonal composition add the dynamic to the image, and when something is diagonally, it appears to be in motion. So it's worth trying it in your projects. But it's important not to overuse eye-catchy things. Here's an example, which is a lot of it, and it's very, very probably it won't be effective in digital because you don't know what to focus on. Okay, another part of psychology, which is very helpful in our work in general, not only in communication, is social psychology. And understanding why we are trying to help others is important, but like in almost every area of psychology, there is no one answer. We've got a few theories of helping, and one of the most popular is a stimulus balance model. According to this model, seeing of suffering causes unpleasant emotional reaction. And then we choose the most optimal way to reduce this feeling, considering the costs. So it implies two important parts of the content we've asked for help. First one, we must arouse empathy and emotional stimulation. That's why very often sad content with one animal looking directly to the camera and text pointing to its subjectivity work well. Here is an example of the effective post from our campaign. One animal which is suffering and text, if I barked, would you allow it? On the other hand, an example of a post that we test from time to time, but usually turns out to be much less effective. It was for a charity day, and it was definitely more positive. And second one, we need to show how someone can help and relieve these negative emotions and make it easy to reduce the cost of helping. That's why it's not enough to say, help me, but rather to do something specific, like make a donation, sign a petition, or sign up for a vegan challenge. But like I said, a lot of things affect whether we help. So here are some tips to remember. One of the things that reduces the chances of helping is the distraction of responsibility. That is the feeling that I don't have to do anything because someone else will do it. And it's worth fighting against it and emphasize that in the message that just the role of individual. We are more willing to help individuals we perceive as belonging to our group. So it's a good idea to try to broaden the category of we in your message and emphasize that animals feel fear and pain just as we do, and maybe avoid calling them farmed animals. Next, very important part, don't shame. Feeling ashamed makes you less likely to help. So saying that you are not doing enough or that you are spending money on your own pleasure when animals are suffering does not help. What also affects helping are the norms in which we function. Therefore, showing how many people are already helping, that is a popular thing to do in a meaningful for the audience group, should be helpful. In general, norms are socially agreed and internalized rules and prohibitions on how to behave in social situations. And we want to change it so that it reduces the suffering of animals. That's why talking about helping and showing how others are helping is important. Media coverage, trendsetters, entertainment programs, or public engagements or actions help with it. Okay, and the last example of how psychology could help us in communication is using or being aware of cognitive biases. There are many, but I will talk about a few of them. Anchoring is the tendency to be influenced by knowledge or information, even when it's known to be false. And that's why it's important what we are saying, but also what we are not saying. And we should be careful, for example, with myth-busting messages. They could be popular in our very dedicated group, but they often suggest things that do not help us and would not have crossed the minds of the audience by themselves. Here are some examples. For example, writing things like, that's not true that because of soybeans pears grow. It tells people who might not even know about it, and it sows the seed of doubt whether soy milk is really healthy. Another example, in recent years, there have been 2 attempts to ban the fur farming in Poland. And an active group of farmers was telling in the media that 50,000 people would lose their jobs. It wasn't a real number. And it is wrong for AR organizations to repeat this information, even by denying it. Unless someone asks about it, there is no point in talking about it. To many people, this argument against the banning fur farming would not come to mind at all. But anchoring can also be used to our advantage. Here's an example from our donation widget. The donation amounts are anchors for our minds and indicate how much should be given. The next bias is authority bias, which is relying heavily and being influenced by authorities. And it's very often used in ads for medications. And that's also why it's so important to try to include famous people or experts in our messages. The next cognitive biases is out-group homogeneity and in-group favorism. And they are somehow connected. In general, we have a tendency to see our group as more diverse than others. And in general, we prefer our group, even if the division between us and them is insignificant and arbitrary. And because of our lack of contact with farm animals and how they are perceived, they become a whole, massive group, which makes it harder to empathize and to see them as individual beings and help them. That's why it's so important to show individuals, not only by pictures, but also by narration showing their characteristics, personality, stories, emotions. It's worth remembering that the division us versus them makes a difference. And if you want to convince someone to eat a plant-based diet, don't divide us versus meat eaters. But on the other hand, if you are raising money for anti-fur campaign, where your goal is not to influence the farmers, but engage your audience and raise money, and us against fur versus the farmers divide might be helpful. Okay, there are a lot of biases, but in general, it's worth remembering that what we do is really unintuitive. Systemic changes to reduce suffering or the number of animals are abstract. That's why it's in your digital communication with ask to help is worth to avoid large numbers. For many people, the story of one broiler will be more engaging than the fact of how many millions of broilers are suffering. It's also good to explain to your followers what are you doing and how their actions affect it. So when using call to action, try to explain in a very simple way how it could help. Also be specific and don't leave people with a message like help animals. Show exactly what to do. And remember that stories are very interesting for our brains and try to use them when it's possible. In conclusion, what we do as animal advocates is difficult and there are no easy answers how to do X, also in the area of the communication. But we should look for inspiration and knowledge everywhere and think about how to practically apply what we already know thanks to development and science. And connecting these pieces together makes you have even more questions and feelings that you don't know anything for sure. But certainly allows us to be better activists for animals. Thank you.
Great presentation. We've got a few questions from attendees. So we've got a question from Gabriel. Hey Magda, how much do you take into account Google Analytics being blocked by some people? Have you found ways to calculate how many of your web users are not visible to you?
I think that it's a little bit problematic because it's true that we can't see all users, but in general, the goal of using tools like analytics, it's not to know exactly how many people, for example, signed up the petition. The goal of using it is rather to see the general tendency. For example, what is more effective, but it's not. I think that it's not crucial to have a specific real number. I think the one way to check how big is the difference could be, for example, checking how many signatures in some period of time we've got and how many signatures the analytical tool shows us. But I think that we just should remember that it's just, for example, a piece of our traffic that it's about, it depends on the country, but probably it's about, I don't know, 60% or 70 or 80, I don't know. And that's, it should show us the general tendency, not the specific number, which is not so important because we just want to know like what's helping, what's not, and not how many, for example, donations we've got, because we know it, for example, in our other tools, like just on our account, on our system with signatures. So yeah, it's just worth to remember about it. And just check general tendencies in these tools.
Great, we've got another question. Do you think that focusing on suffering and problems or focusing on opportunities and solutions is most effective? Should we be posting pictures of suffering animals or happy animals?
Well, it depends on the goal of for example, of the post or on the ads. Our experience shows us that the negative content, emotional content is working very good. And it don't have to be disturbing, it rather should be sad. So for example, also not only by we can create this feeling not only by the picture, but also by the narration or the story or by subtitles. So in our case, negative content, for example, if it goes to the signatures or donations, works best. But I think the situation could be a little bit different at the bottom of the funnel, that, for example, for people who are really engaged in this topic, here I'm not so sure, because here maybe more positive content or more like informative content, more about, for example, of our effectiveness could be better. But like at for general population, definitely the negative content will be more effective, especially with ads or with social media posts.
We've got a question from Jakub. How organizations can apply such knowledge at every level of structure? It seems hard to demand from everybody to know and follow scientific research in this domain.
Yeah, I think it's also not it's not so important to have at every level to have a very detailed knowledge about these things. More like it should be someone who wants to dig in some things and then try to spread this knowledge in a more easy form. And also giving some feedback. For example, if someone prepares some content, to give feedback and explaining that, for example, it could be done like this because of something. But I think that it's not necessary on every level to know a lot of details. It should be enough just to have some basics, to understand some basics, like for example, why we should, for example, I don't know, why preparing a ads campaign we should test only one thing. It's a very general rule. And it's not everyone has to understand very deeply why. We can just prepare some advices in a more easy form for anyone in the organization.
Great. I think we have the time for one question. Would you prefer to hire someone with academic knowledge in these subjects, marketing, psychology, comms, etc., or someone with 3-year industry experience? What about 5 or 10 years experience?
It's a hard question, because our experience with only marketing specialists without the contact with animal rights movement wasn't very successful, but it's not the rule. From the other hand, this academic knowledge is great, but I'm not sure if it will be easy to find someone who wants to, because in everyday work, sometimes we don't have a time to go into details. So someone have to be eager to skip some details and go to the more straight form or something. So I think that, I don't know about hiring. The best person to hire probably would be with a little bit of with both of these fields, but I think the best person to hire will be just with willing to learn, because especially these things aren't really hard to learn in a way that, for example, how to prepare ads, how to make social media. This knowledge, it's not so hard to get. So probably it will be better with someone who has an academic background, but have a motivation to learn how to use it, and sometimes go for some compromises with it.
Great. I think the rest of the questions will be answered on our networking session, to which I invite everyone from our chat to join us on Zoom, and the link should be already on chat. So feel free to join us.
Okay, thank you.